pose a particular example that illustrates several things that were discussed here. And that is, we are creating a multimodal center on 3rd Street. And we talked about the need for parking and remote location and getting people out of downtown. I've been working on a downtown agenda and strategy for K-12 Fusion. And one of the things that we are tentatively including at least is that if we have a multimodal center and we put substantial parking there and we create a visitor center, then we solve the transportation problem for the downtown in the sense of getting the cars at a remote location. And that requires some cooperative strategic thinking and work on behalf of several agencies. Is that an example of something that could be done, and are there any comments about the feasibility of doing it?
I would say that the feasibility is going to be challenging because, and it's just the way that the subsidies are actually categorized. Federal Transit said, we'll give you money to build a transit facility. If you want to do something else, we can talk about it, but you're going to have to bring some money from somewhere else to do that. A good example would be if we were to build a parking deck in conjunction with the multimodal transportation center. We could actually go and say that the multimodal transportation center needs, for employees, for Greyhound, for whatever modes are in there, needs 20 parking spaces. We'd like to build 200. They said, we'll pay for 20. You know, if you can find someone else to pay for the 180. So there's opportunities there. I would say that it makes it more challenging. But again, that's where whatever I was talking about, that's where leadership comes in. You know, if I were to sit here and say, oh, it's too hard, or you know, it's too much paperwork, it's too much of a hassle, we're not interested in doing that, then we're not going to get anywhere. We'll get a transportation center that really may be very limited in what we can do with it. Whereas if we look outside the box and say, here's an opportunity to make this transportation much more successful by integrating a visitor center, that's where leadership comes in.
Well, and I guess I'll touch on this. We are looking at some public-private partnerships as a means to have not just a transit center, not just a rail center, but a multimodal center that incorporates other components. You know, a visitor center may be a possibility, hotel, office. The possibilities are endless as long as somebody else can bring some funds to the table and there can be a partnership there. Charlotte is a classic example of where the public-private partnership has worked. And so what we're trying to do is model that philosophy here. Albert can only secure funds for the transit element. The rail portion, the rail piece, only federal rail funds could be used for that. So, but if we can build upon those two and bring other partners to the table, then it is feasible. And we're, we've been approached by a couple of folks that have been interested in that. And, we don't have anything out on the street, but, it's something that in the future, when we can secure the funding for the centers, then we will continue down that road and down that process.
One of the things that Linda brought up that apply to this is, again, a change in the ability for the transit system, for example, to benefit from program income. One of the things that we did, for example, in Sacramento, very heavily, was when they decided that where the rail lines were going, they bought a lot of adjacent land. And that was supported, okay? Because what they were able to do is then say, we're going to build, so let's say, for example, we're going to build a hotel. We're not going to build it, but we have the land rights control, okay? So now that we have the land rights, we can indeed have, for example, a land lease, a ground lease, that goes up underneath that hotel. That might work a lot better for the hotel long term than it would for them to come in and try to buy that piece of land, okay? But the reality is, it's going to generate income back to the transit system. That would be you. So the transit system might be able to acquire it at a reasonable price, then doing deal with a hotel that suddenly makes that something that gives them future revenue, but also makes it a competitive advantage. One of the big things I would say is you've got to create incentives. Okay? And again, that in part is leadership, but it's also thinking a little bit harder with what Albert said a minute ago, I mean, it's easy, the easiest thing, I can say this from a financial, easiest thing for me to say when you come to me is no. I got the money, I can keep the money. No is always a good answer for me. Because while I may not be making any more money, I'm not losing any money. Okay? That's easy. You got to help me think through where it is and how it is that I can take the vision that you have and make it work. And most importantly, you got to be able to look at each person who comes to the table with you and figure out how you can make it a comparative advantage for them. I have the opportunity to build this hotel anywhere I want, anywhere I want. You want it for me to build it where you would like to have it. You got to make that a positive for me, okay? And if you do that, I mean, if you look around a lot of the, again, I will say this, a lot of the new Star Transit-oriented development, they've had some very successful, some have been successful, but they have had some very successful projects that have been done basically because what they did was go into it with a thought in mind that if we can get something built, something else built here, another facility, like she said in Sacramento, what the city council said was we will not build, it was the state actually, yeah, it was the state that said we will not build anything that is not transit-oriented in its nature. Okay? So every place that we go to put up a new state facility has got to be on the transportation line. Okay? Those are kinds of things and decisions that have to be made. They can be made locally, they can be made statewide, but they need to be made so that people understand when they come in. You want to go back to the question that was asked back there. I've done development. I will go away from a development if it's too hard to do. I will not go away from a development if I can understand clearly how to get it done. I don't mind that you ask me to do that. Particularly if you tell me there's either an incentive for me, or for example, it's going to make it easier for my development to fill up if I'm in that location, for example, because I'm right on the transit line, which means more people are going to want to come and live in my development. Okay, live in my apartment, live in my whatever, because they can walk right downstairs, get on the line, and be downtown in 10 minutes. That's great. You got to help me understand how that benefits my development. If you do that, or if you create an incentive for me to be there, and you get to me at the beginning of what I'm planning to do, you will find that, again, most developers will welcome that. They don't run from it. Where they really run from it is when you come to them after the fact. As they've hired this guy to design something, they've gone out and looked at a couple pieces of land, they got it all locked and loaded, and you come in and say, well, you know, there are 3 more things you're going to have to do in order to lift this development from the planning stages to whatever. Well, look, I'm already $100,000 into this deal. Do not come to me at that point and say, this is what else we want you to do. Okay? Somebody says, we're hearing that somebody's coming there, get to them fast. Tell them what's out there. Make sure the rules are already in place so they'll understand what they have to do in order to meet them. If there's a density advantage, and I know these guys have talked about it, but if you know that there's a density incentive, get it out in front of that guy from the very beginning. And you'll be surprised how easy they'll say, well, you know what, can you design that so we can use all 21 units so we can put on that acre? Let's get to it, because I'm making money that way.
Isn't there a good precedent for this in that, what's the thing called, the easy?
That's what Chris is on.
Yeah, I mean, that's not about transit, but it is about density. Increased density is an incentive.
It is, and transit's one of the qualifiers.
Oh, it is already.
So connecting the dots on that, how soon is that little park and ride at Ogden or Scotts Hill that those people in the apartment complex could have gone to, which would mitigate the amount of asphalt used for parking, which would be the suburbanites have?
You know, that's the question I had. Everett and I sat down and I said, you know, I think I intrinsically kind of understand that the public sector's got to contribute some funds, the private sector's got to contribute some funds, but right now, no one's contributing any funds. And when's the turning point? How's that going to come about? Well, I think the commissioner's decision is going to help that turning point come a little sooner, because what they said is status quo ain't going to cut it anymore. You got to either pick a smarter location or figure out some other way to manage your transportation or build a smaller project. So,
Was that Market Street one an example of one that would be pretty easy? So that was a,
no, that was not. That was not. It was a high density apartment complex. Standard apartment
It
complex.
is approaches for transit credits, and they said, well, do your plans include a transit line along here in the future? I said, yes, they do. They said, we want to use that as a transit credit. And I said, well, no, because, you're really trying to take advantage without, showing any tangible results. You say, okay, well, how about if we use the bus stop that's over, a quarter mile away, and we give you $3,000 to buy shelter? And that's kind of when the talk started. But again, it was, they wanted, and of course we're in a kind of an economic development, and certainly a development environment that's really challenging. So they're looking at ways to minimize, their investment to get this credit so they can get this done. But, again, it's got to go out in the development that's willing to really put in, put their money where their mouth is, instead of saying, let's do as little as we can to get the transit enticement. Instead of saying that, they're saying, let's work with transit to have the best enticement for our development and for the community.
Is it easy to characterize those transit criteria, or is that just too wonky? I mean, the ones in the Easy D, can you say what those are?
It's, you have to be located on a existing or planned transit line. And the planned transit line has to be, the phrase we have is it's got to be in an adopted planning document.
Do you do internal capture when you look at some of those plans as far as traffic impacts? Is it that project, would it potentially serve the community out there with the kind of housing to support, jobs that are needed to, all the support services in that community that are not necessarily where people may be driving there to
For like a
work in the grocery
theoretical-
stores and the hardware stores, now they're driving from other places. Do you look at internal capture as a way to study transportation impacts?
Well, whenever we review a transportation impact analysis, per se, in any development that generates over 100 AM or PM peak hour trips is required to complete one of those. Depending on the types of land uses associated with that development, there is an internal capture rate that can be assigned to those uses. And so we do assign that. It's based on Institute of Traffic Engineers internal capture rate. We assign that to those uses whenever we review those transportation impact analysis.
So if it's not an actual mixed-use land use project, though, would you see where it would maybe, like, people that are in that move there could be working just down the street instead of coming all the way out from town, or is that sort of analysis done?
What we would look at is if it's on that site. If it's not on that site, then we would not look at it.
You don't see it as this is going to be housing that's now going to be for the people who are going to be working in that neighborhood type thing. It's going to cut down on traffic because they work there.
For like the district, for the exceptional design district, we do. I mean, it's one of the criteria is that that there's employment for. You have to have one job for each household in the development within a half-mile radius of the project. But that's not necessary. That's nothing that we can guarantee. So we're not going to say that if you move in this development, you have to work within a half-mile project. So I don't know what they'd be a